Well, we're continuing our teaching series called The Way of Jesus Every Day. And it seems like an obvious title, but how many know Christianity sometimes we can kind of get it wrapped up in that, the way of Jesus is just on Sundays or some days. And every day is emphasized because that's not only what we're talking about here on Sunday, but what we're trying to do throughout the week. And so we've paired our teaching series with what we're calling D groups. And D group stands for discipleship groups. And so we're just doing these small groups. And already I've heard we've got about a dozen groups have started and continuing. And 50, 60 people are already involved in groups, and it's continuing. Some of you haven't really communicated you're in a group, so you're just doing it. And that's great. Just do it. And what's neat about it is it's not only what we're talking about on Sundays, it's tied in to what we're doing throughout the week in our D group that we talk about it, but also through our D group packets. And so there's a few, if you're here in person, there's a few left here printed, but also you can get this online, and it's available just on our website, or you go on Facebook and look for it, but it's a PDF, a version of this. It's just a guide, and what we're doing is we're going through the book of Luke, and we're going to continue to do that here this morning. And what I found with Jesus, when we're reading about, and just reading through the book of Luke, is, and it seems kind of an obvious thing as well, is that Jesus' way is way different than the world's way. Have you noticed that? And the way of Jesus is way different than the religious way. It is. His way is so unique. And so today, as you read through the book of Luke 2, you find that Jesus, his biggest challenges weren't really the issues of the world and the culture out there. It was the issues and challenges of the religious people of that day. If you read through most of the conflict that Jesus went through, it had to do with religious people. Now, I've got this question as we start off as, have you ever met a religious person? Have you ever met somebody, and when I do that, and there's kind of a negativity with that, right? Because when we think of religion, many times we think it's very, very negative, because a lot of times people bring connection between religion and rules. And I don't know about you, but I don't like a lot of rules. But religious people do. And they have certain rules. And yeah, it seems so different than Jesus. And, back in my college days, I was working for a guy that I was befriending, and really, it was really neat. I was working with him in some landscaping, and he one day comes to me and goes, dude, I had a spiritual experience. I was up at Seaholm Hill, and I was walking my dogs and drinking a beer, and I just saw Jesus. And I'm like, wow, okay, tell me about that a little bit. Started talking a little. I said, well, in that time, I'm like, well, you should come to church with me. And so he ends up coming through the church doors, and he said he was going to come that particular Sunday. I was looking for him. It was a bigger church, and so it was crowded and everything. And the time I got to him, something happened. He walked through the door, and immediately a man approached him and said to him, he had a blazer suit on with a little tag that said usher, and he says, young man, you need to take off that baseball cap. This is the house of God. Later on, after the service, he says, yeah, he goes, man, I said, how did it go? He goes, I don't know, it was weird. He goes, I get in there, and I was told by a really kind of grouchy guy that I needed to take my baseball hat off. He goes, I had hat hair, and I was kind of embarrassed, and you know what, my friend? He never darkened the door of a church for decades since then. And it saddened me. It saddened me the fact that religious people really sure give Jesus a bad rap. And today, when you run into people, even for you as a follower of Christ, and you talk about having a faith in Jesus and everything, people will label you, oh, yeah, you're just one of those religious people. And that's just not really fair. And really what's happened is that there's just a lot of religious people that kind of made Jesus not that, that really relevant to people's lives, and in fact, they're annoyed by it. They did a recent study they polled non-Christians, And they asked this question, do Christians get on your nerves? And they found that 44% checked, strongly or even agree that they get on their nerves. Almost half of non-Christians think Christians get on their nerves. I'm thinking, I'm a Christian. There's a lot of Christians that get on my nerves as well. And I think that the misnomer many times, this is what the study found, and much of it has to do online, that good-intended, well-intended Christians post things online that they think they're trying to support the Christian worldview or stance on particular issues or politics and everything, and this is the Christian version. And what they find is that it's not only helpful, but it's harmful to actually the non-Christians out there that see that and go, oh, they're judgmental. They're this way and this way. And what actually is counterproductive. So that's what they found in this study. And they said it's no different than sitting a yard sign out when people drive by and going, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. That was the same thing. Now it's just digitized. Wow. What are you finding is that a lot of religious steps people can take, and yet what we found is the non-Christians are looking at Jesus as very outdated and very judgy. And the reality is when you read through the Gospels, when you read actually the words of Jesus, you find something about Jesus is that Jesus isn't that religious. In fact, what we're looking at look at here in a moment is actually Jesus. There's a moment here in Luke 6 that we're going to read, is Jesus is actually irreligious. And so I want to turn to this passage here today where Jesus is confronted on a religious activity, and his response isn't very religious at all. In Luke 6:1, it says this, you can follow along. It says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? And you read that and go, really? Really, this is unlawful? Well, disciples were technically doing something wrong. They were working. They were picking grain and then threshing it with their fingers and eating it. But that was a sign. It wasn't the eating part of it. It was the working part of it. It wasn't even the picking. It was the threshing. That was what? Talk about, being picky about picking. Okay, that was just it's just amazing. And then a couple Sundays ago, you're like, what's going on with this? We talked about this, about Pharisees, this subgroup of people. We were reading, you read maybe in your D packets about these subgroups. And in there, it talks about a Pharisee. And a Pharisee's job was to help people keep in line to along the way. He was trying to help. They're trying to help people follow the line, follow the religious code that was day. It's kind of like spiritual hall monitors. You remember hall monitors in school? Some of you had that as a student. You remember the hall monitors? And they would wear, and I don't tell you what, it was like empowering Gestapo, right? It was like, don't walk, don't run. Make sure you spit that gum out. You're late to class. Mind your P's and Q's. That's what the job of the Pharisees were. They were the ones that would have said, you need to take your hat off. This is the house of God. That's what it was. And Jesus comes along, and he has a different approach. See, Jesus comes along, and he doesn't give in to the guilt here. He actually uses it as an opportunity. Listen to the response as the religious rule reminders as he speaks to them. He says this, Jesus answered them, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, taking the consecrated bread. He ate what is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Jesus is pointing out here, and you have to kind of go in the context here because you're like, what is that all about? Well, the hearers, the people that are in earshot knew exactly what he was talking about. He's referring to 1 Samuel where David and his companions are on the run because the king at the time, King Saul, was jealous of David. King Saul got rejected as a king. God says, David's going to be my new anointed king, and that was not great for King Saul, who ruled his own kingdom. And he pursued them, and they were on the run, and David and his men got very, very hungry, and they went in the temple, and they ate of the consecrated bread, the show bread that was there. And so everybody understood that reference that was going on, but it was something even deeper. See, it was beyond, because Jesus is what we find is that the disciples were not disobeying God's law. They were disobeying man's law of interpretation of that law. You got to understand that the Pharisees, over the many times of the 10 Commandments, there ended up being over 600 commandments or rules to follow the 10 Commandments. These are man-made rules. These religious rules were put on them of interpretation. And so Jesus is trying to help them, not the letter of the law. He's trying to help them understand the spirit of the law. There's something greater he's doing. But even more, what we find is it was about a power struggle. Really, they think Jesus was parallel, and David was again, God's anointed to be king, and he was being hounded by this dying dynasty of Saul. But then on the other hand, what we find is that Jesus is actually then the anointed new king, the king that's being hounded by the dying dynasty of the Jewish Pharisees. And so we get this power struggle, but really what we get is this motive, the deeper purpose. Jesus isn't confronting this problem's brought to him. What was the issue? Well, the issue was really something he was clarifying. And really the core issue that Jesus confronts everything in. And you read through all the confrontation he had with the Pharisees, and where they rubbed up against each other, and this tension that was there had everything to do with the fact that people were so much concerned about hats rather than hearts. They're more concerned about the rules than the relationship. And the way, kind of today's truth to give you today is that relationship overrides religion every time. For Jesus, relationship overrides religion every single time. You know this of understand religion. Religion's always been about getting on God's good side, doing the right things, acting the right way, wearing the right thing, not wearing, don't wear that, you wear a hat, not wear a hat. Oh, it was all about the rules. Relationship is always about God coming to us through Christ that leads us back to God. And so Jesus is basically saying to these religious hat cops, he says, the motive is right here. This is what he says in verse 5. He said, then Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So Jesus shares this story about Saul or David and the showbread, and he'll get to any point. And then he just gets to this place, and he just comes to this place and goes, listen, let me just lay it out for you. This is what it is. This is what really matters. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Now, that term Son of Man, Jesus calls himself over and over again. Rarely do you see hearing that Jesus calls himself the Son of God. Others point out that he's the Son of God. But he calls himself the Son of Man. It's actually a title of humility. It's actually a title of relatability with us. We're all Son of Man, right? We all came from man at some point, right? We know that, right? We know that. But that's what Jesus is pointing out. But here, though, here Jesus is humble. He never calls himself out. Look at me, I'm God and everything. But right here, though, it's interesting. He does. Right here, he expresses his authority. This very, very grain-picking moment, he says, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. And you got to think that the religious leaders are going, Lord, really? Like, who died and made you boss? And they're like, Jesus is like, well, if you only knew, right? What was going to happen. Jesus identifies himself as Lord, not to lord over. It's not a power struggle as though it appears to be that way. No, he's not trying to control lives. Jesus is sharing the rule and reign, not about the rules, but about captivating hearts. And it's always been that way. He wants to be the Lord of the Sabbath. What is Sabbath? Sabbath is rest. Sabbath is something, a gift that he gives us in this particular issue. He makes it a bigger deal of revealing who he is. That he's the Lord of of rest. I don't know about you, but we have lived in restless times. And the irony of it is the fact that some of us have had a lot of downtime. Some of us find ourselves in our quarantine life that we've lived this last year more frustrated than restful. You could say I have had a lot of time on my own, but it's not been very, very relaxing. And what's happened over the years, we used to go to work and we went to school, and then school and work became at the same place at home. And there was this blending that's happened between where we don't, or blurring that's happening between what's work and what's home and what's school and what's home, and they kind of intersect, and it's all this digital stuff going together. And what we find is there's no rest at all. And we got to be reminded, if ever we need it in a time of history, is what Jesus is calling us to, is this Lord of Sabbath out of relationship, but not of rules. The Pharisees were making this a religious thing versus this relationship that Jesus directs us, everyone, towards. And so the challenge for us is somehow we've got to get off this treadmill and begin to look at what Jesus offers, not in this monotony of life, this restless life, but he invites us as the Lord of rest, the Lord of Sabbath. Sabbath is so amazing. If you don't know, Sabbath was created way back at the beginning. It's one of the first things that God himself, after creating all creation, he created Sabbath. The Bible says in Genesis 2, it says that God had finished the work that he had been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work created that he had done. Now, God didn't need to rest because he was tired. God sets in motion a rhythm that he's calling us, that he knew that we needed to rest. That the Sabbath was more than a day off. It was something very amazing. In fact, the word Sabbath in Hebrew it's Shabbat, which means actually delight. So that's where we get the word delight. It's not just something, just taking a break, and God just goes, I created. I mean, that's a lot of work, right? Creating the world and the universe and everything in 6 days. And he goes, I'm tired. No, what he goes, he was like, whoa, look what I created. I delight. It's like what the people describe what God did there in that moment was he stood back from his creation and go, like an artist going, whoa, look at this. And the most pride creation is us. That he created us in his very own image. And so God declared it to be holy. And holy doesn't mean perfect, even though God's perfect. Holy means special, set apart. So Jesus in the day, the Sabbath got hijacked by the rules. It got hijacked by them worrying about picking granules of wheat, and they made it so not what it is. And Jesus comes along. Let me tell you what it really is. Let me tell you the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. Let me tell you what the greater work that I'm doing. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. That reminds us, points these religious rule keepers, they're missing it by the mile. In fact, you can put this as a thought for today, is when rules matter more to us than reason, then they become meaningless. When rules matter more to us than the reason, they become meaningless. How ridiculous for these religious leaders to criticize Jesus' disciples for picking a little bit of grain and calling it unlawful. And how picky we can get and miss the moment, miss the opportunity, miss it. So somehow we got fixed on hats over hearts. Jesus always brought it back to the matter of the heart. Relationship overrides religion every time. Now, make no mistake, rules matter. We need to have rules, right? It keeps us alive, right? Safety is important, okay? Guardrails in our life. And there's moral rules that God has established, but they're all for our good. They're all wanting to point us back to create this relationship we have. But the rules don't make the relationship. You do all these things, now we can have relationship. That's not how Jesus lets them know. It starts not from the outside in, but the inside out. And what happens when we make the rule more important than the reason, we can create pharisaical attitudes, and we miss the whole point. And what we need to discover is back in that day, the Pharisees were grappling for control. They saw that Jesus was this threat, and they looked for ways to trick him. They looked for ways to bring him down. They looked for him ways to cancel him out, and they couldn't do it because he was about the work of the Lord. He was God in the flesh, and there's this work of relationship that was a threat to their insecure kingdom that they were trying to build. It had everything to do with control. How many know there's times when fear causes us to hang on to control? We're going through this last year, extremes with people with the pandemic and the virus, and people are just, they're living in not only physical quarantine life, but also many people in fear are living emotional and spiritual quarantine and not having any kind of contact with anybody of significance. And that's an extreme. But on the other extreme, we have people fear of losing freedom. And there's a freaking out that's going on. And it's just, it's all fear on both sides of what's happening. And the sad thing is, the religious of this day, Jesus was this threat of their religious ways of doing it. And the sad thing is the Sabbath became this religious thing, and really there wasn't relationship. And we can do the same thing. We can get into the have-tos and miss the whole point. In fact, I think there's two extremes when it comes to killing the meaning of Sabbath. First is legalism. Legalism says you better do this. If you don't do this, you're missing out on what needs to be done, and you're not in good standing with God. That's a really religious thing to do. The other thing is to dismiss it on the other side, lack of its importance. And that's the busyness that comes in. We say, I'm too busy to take a day off. I own a company. I cannot get away. And I what it is that first of all, I was thinking, are you that important? Are you saying you're more important than God? Because if there's a lack of trust. So somehow you think you're better than God. That's another extreme. Rather than really trusting the Lord has given us something, not that we have to, but that we want to. It's leading us in a relationship. What does he want to be? The Lord of the Sabbath, the Lord of rest. It's an invitation that Jesus gives us. A couple weeks ago, my daughter and I we flew down to the Arizona, Phoenix area. She's wanting to attend a Christian university. And so we had a good dad and daughter trip together. And what I really loved about this university that she's looking to go to in the fall is the tour guide says, as he's sharing about this Christian college, he says, we don't make students sign a statement of faith that they've got to believe in Jesus. We invite people into a relationship. We present Jesus to them, and then they choose Jesus. And I thought, that's it. That's it. Anybody could sign anything, and you just sign something and you go to the school. It doesn't mean anything. No, what matters is the heart. What matters, and he said, we've seen so many students, even though maybe they come from a Christian background, a Christian faith, they actually truly put their faith into Christ as a young adult. They own their faith because of that invitation. I'm like, that's Jesus. Jesus invites us in. He doesn't mandate to follow him. See, relationship overrides religion every time. And know this, rituals are not bad. They were given to guide us, but not to enslave us. Nothing wrong with rituals. Nothing wrong with these opportunities that we can engage God and what he has. See, God established the Sabbath as a blessing back in the times of creation. But when sin entered the world, work became a burden. And what ended up happening, even after God made covenant with his own nation, Israel rebelled and they got invaded. In fact, they were taken enslaved for 400 years by the Egyptian empire. Moses comes along, and God speaks to Moses and said, I want my people to be freed. And Moses, with God's miraculous help, leads the people out into the desert toward the promised land, and God reestablishes covenant with Moses and the people, and part of the covenant in the Ten Commandments is the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And what we find is that God's speaking to these people and saying, you are no longer slaves. All they knew was work 7 days a week. And he's saying, listen, I'm establishing covenant with you, and I'm giving you something. It's called Sabbath. You are freed people. You do not have to be enslaved by work any longer. There is a break that I'm giving you, and it's a break not only to take a breather and find rest, but to worship me and trust in me that I'll take care of all the things you need to do in to help you with the 6 days if you honor me in the seventh day. But it's a gift that I've given you because I want to be, as Jesus called himself later, the Lord of the Sabbath. I want to encourage us that we're no longer slaves. We no longer have to be slaves to our jobs and slaves to this world. We are free people. That Jesus invites us into this relationship that he wants us to have. And Sabbath is this gift that we get to do. It's a rhythm part of our week. I love what Mark says in his gospel. It goes a little bit detail on this confrontation that Jesus had with these religious rule keepers. Jesus is the Lord of Sabbath, and then he says this, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. What is it saying? God gives us this gift as free people, not enslaved to this world and the domination that we just, on this treadmill that we never could get off. God's saying, listen, I've given you something so beautiful and so wonderful. And just as I called it to be a delight, it's to be delight in you. No longer a burden or slavery to it, but especially slavery to religion. But a wonderful gift we give. But even further, not only is it a gift that we receive, it's something that actually we can give through. And we do. See, relationship overrides religion every time. Finally, is this. It's when we let love lead us in doing what is life-giving. It's when we let love lead us in doing what is life-giving. See, the story continues on, this encounter that Jesus has. So there's this grain-picky moment that happens, and then the very next Luke writes this. He says, on another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. Remember, he's a threat to them, threat to the religion. So he watched him closely to see if they would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, get up, stand in front of everyone. So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to him, I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? He looked around at all of them and then said to the man, stretch out your hand. He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. And you read that and go, really, religious people? Seriously? Are you kidding me? What is your problem? The dude is legitimately healed by Jesus, and you're caught up in some rules that's healing people's considered work? Really? That's what's happening. You need to know deeper, though, that not only was it they were trying to set up Jesus, but you need to know when they looked at that man, they didn't have pity on that man. They looked at he was cursed by God. People who had disfigurements and people that were, especially who were born, they didn't blame the person that was born that way. They blamed the parents. It was a horrible, horrible, terrible view of God and his mercy and grace. But that's what people believed. And so what these religious people, many of them did, their excuse for not doing good is they hide behind the religious rules that we can't do that. One of them is, I can't help that person. It's Sabbath. Man, we don't do any work on Sabbath. And they're missing it. They're about the rules rather than a relationship. They weren't giving life. They were pronouncing death. They were pronouncing judgment on somebody. I tell you, when you try to make a difference in this world, when you try to do things, religious rule keepers will keep you on your toes sometimes, and they think they're helping, but they're not helping. And you can experience a lot of criticism at times in doing good because you didn't do it exactly the way, it's the proper way to do that. Now, let me give you an example. We have I have an old friend, and in fact, he was a youth leader back in the day when I used to take mission trips to Mexico. And in fact, Billy, who I'm going to talk about, used to be part of his church. He's moved to Utah. But my friend Billy, he was kind of a renegade kind of guy. And so he kind of was unorthodox at moments. But he had such a huge heart, has a big heart. And we were actually at a garbage dump. And we were ministering to people in the garbage dump. These people would go through the garbage. And there was hypodermic needles. I mean, everything was dumped this place. And they would find recycling things that they could basically turn in for money and feed their family. And there was actually a community that lived, the dump people lived right outside the city next to the dump, right? And so one day, we're ministering to people, and Billy had a shirt that said Superman on it. And there was a guy, working away, and he looked across the distance. He goes, Superman, and posing, and Billy felt led to give his shirt off the back to this guy who didn't have a shirt. And the guy had Superman, and he connected with him. It was just a great moment. Well, the problem was now Billy didn't have a shirt. And so we're going along and everything, and my friend, he's got tattoos, he's got piercings, which I don't describe where they're at and everything like that. And so he shows up in this base, and the people there and God bless these people, but they were a very religious kind of group of people. And this religious lady, as Billy walked in the door and saw him with no shirt, flips out. I got talked to in an office and everything, and then finally I'm like, you know what? Could we just get him a shirt? And I thought how extreme that was. Billy literally gave his shirt off his back. It wasn't about him. He was trying to serve. And I thought, something, that's the risk that we take in serving people. And Jesus here going, listen, when you're doing good, sometimes people, the rule keepers are going to hold you to it. And Jesus is saying, let's go beyond a day of the week. Let's be life-giving what we do. But understand, when we make a difference sometimes, we don't always see the immediate results until maybe years or even decades later. I was reading and this is a good month. I was reading, with Black History Month, just reading a lot about Black history and getting perspectives of people of color. And I just really appreciate learning and growing. And I was reading about Martin Luther King in 1966, just after he did the I Have a Dream speech in Washington. They did a poll. And, maybe it was a little different back then in how they did it, hard to do it digitally. But they did a poll, and they asked Americans their favorable view of Martin Luther King. Well, even at the height of his popularity, it was 33% favorable, 33%. You think, okay, that kind of makes sense maybe back then. What was interesting is, in 2011, they asked, do you view Martin Luther King as a favorable person? 94% of people agreed with that. What does it say? When we're doing good and we're making a difference and we're trying to push, we're going to push the envelope, and not everybody's like it, and especially the rule keepers are not going to like it. And so we got to think, we got to go beyond I'm not saying break rules to break rules purposes, but we got to get to the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. Lord, help us to see, help us to do good. And Jesus was all about following the heart, following in relationship with him. And Jesus is really kind of pointing it out in this very moment that the holiest thing you can do in the Sabbath is to do good. Jesus gave the one rule of life, of any rules that he gave, was this, is love. He says, love one another as I have loved you. Jesus calls us to lead in love no matter what day of the week it is. And we got to be careful. We can become weary in doing good, but let's not make an excuse not to do anything. Let's not hide behind the rules without realizing, the intent and the heart that what we're called to do. Let us lead out of relationship, not mandated rules that keep us from it. And I want to invite you to the very rule of the ruling of Jesus, if they put it that way, the rule and reign of Jesus, then it's this: he is the wanting to be the Lord of the Sabbath of our lives. Not just to follow rules on a particular day a week. He wants to be, he says, man wasn't created for Sabbath. Sabbath was created for man as this gift, this wonderful thing. And this beautiful opportunity of Sabbath that we get to live in a life of rest. And so if you're feeling restless lately, here is an opportunity for you. In fact, in our D group packets this week, this is this week's spiritual practice. And it's this: set aside and experience a Sabbath this week. But do it out of a relationship with Jesus. Do it in such a way that it's life-giving to you. And I tell you this, some of you are tempted to go, well, I've got too much work to do. Or even this, you'll say, I'm not working hard enough to take a day off and to do that. Sabbath was not about reward. It's a gift that we get. You're never going to be good enough to take it. You think you deserve anything. What we need to realize is this gift for us to set aside and find rest in our work, in our chores, in the world events, and striving and scheming and stressing and just worrying. We need to find time to say, I don't have to do that. I don't have to think about that. I am just going to spend time with Jesus. I'm going to live in this beautiful gift of Sabbath rest, to delight in the Lord, to stop producing and then unplug and be present with God and be present with those I'm with. And so, yes, it's coming on a Sunday and gathering with us or online and having moments. But if you're just keeping your Sabbath to 1 hour a week, you're going to shrivel away in your faith. Give it a day. Give a moment. Give some time in your week to say, Lord, I want to spend time with you. I want to spend time with people that want to be with you as well. And to do that as a family member and your family, if you live alone, get on another side of a screen with somebody. Like, hey, can we Sabbath together? Can we encourage one another? Light a candle. Each light a candle on either screen and say, we're going to spend some time. And maybe it's part of your D group that you're doing that. Finding community in whatever we can. I was in Israel several years ago, and I got to experience Shabbat, which means Hebrew for Sabbath. And I tell you, we had a 3-hour meal. We had different courses, and I felt so relaxed and so invited into this experience of what Sabbath is about. And I thought, we just need to stop and the busyness and the restlessness and to take time to rest in Sabbath. And I encourage you to do that. Don't make it a religious rule-keeping thing, but inviting into this relationship. Listen, Jesus cares way more about your heart than your hat. Cares way more about the rules that you need to follow and versus relationship he wants to have. And speaking of that, the heart and the hat, my friend, I can tell you, decades later, came to this church. He was living in California, and he says, hey, I'm in town. And so we met at our old place. So we used to eat at the Old Town Cafe, downtown Bellingham, had breakfast together. And then he looks over across from me, goes, this is decades later, he goes, hey, dude, you were like trying to be a minister or something. Whatever happened to that? I said, actually, I'm a pastor. McAvoy, you're a pastor? And he says, and I said, yeah, I pastor a church out in Birch Bay. And you remember where the water slide park is? He goes, oh, yeah, I know where that. And he shows up one Sunday. And it was so cool as he walked through these stairs. I saw my friend have his baseball cap on. And nobody hassled him. And I was so thrilled that he'd be able to hear the gospel. And even saw people respond in faith. And I'm praying for him to find faith. And maybe he has already in my contact. Hopefully he will. But what it does is that's what I want to be about relationship with Jesus. And that's what Jesus wants for all of us. And so if you've been caught up, you're watching or you're here, and you've been caught up in religion, you've been caught up in rules, and you've been trying to follow them, they're never going to be good enough. Jesus is not a religious being. He's not into religion. He's in a relationship. And he wants us to have that with him. And he invites us in to find this beautiful, amazing gift called rest. So I'm going to invite Chris and Hillary to come on up as we close. And we're going to have a moment of communion. We're going to do communion just a little bit different today. We're actually not going to get too religious about it. We're going to do something here in a moment. But I want to ask this question as we're about to do this. Last question. Are you a restless soul? Are you a restless soul? Are you restless in your religious activities? Are you just trying to achieve and you're trying to do the best you can and you're finding yourself exhausted in that? On the other hand, though, you're wrestling with your own heart because you actually, just as the slaves of Egypt, you find yourself in slavery by your problems and your sin. And you're wrestling with that in your life. And you're wrestling with sin. Jesus reaches both. He reaches the religious person and he reaches the non-religious person and says, I want a relationship with you. I want a relationship with you. And I want to give you not just a day of rest. I want you to live a restful life. I love the invitation, this invitation that Jesus gives us. He tells us this. He says, come to me, all you are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me and learn from me. I am gentle in heart, and you can find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He invites us into this relationship to find rest in him. Don't you want that today? I want that today. And what Jesus did is he provided that rest, not only coming to this earth, but he took our religiosity and he took our sin and that burden that we're carrying, the restlessness, and he took it. He says, take my yoke upon me. Basically, he has big shoulders, and he took that yoke, which was the cross, and he put it on his shoulders, and he was nailed to the cross for our sin and for our burdens, that we no longer have to be slaves. And he died for us so that we can find that rest. The burden of sin is put to rest. Jesus rose on the third day and provided for us life and life eternal, that we will find eternal rest in him. He goes even further. After 40 days, then he ascended to heaven. And the Bible says in Hebrews that he then sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. What was that? That was a job well done. And when you're done with the job, you sit down and you find rest. That's the life that Jesus invites us in. And we're going to have an opportunity. Do you have that rest in your heart? Jesus cares little about what's on your head. He cares what you on the outside. He cares about your heart. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this moment. And I pray that we got super clarity of what you're about and who you're about. You're about relationship with us. And we've heard it, many of us, over and over again, but somehow we've clouded it with rules. Somehow we've clouded it with mandates and regulations and everything. And Lord, you just want to cut to the heart. God, you care so much about our heart. Care for our very soul. And I pray for the restless soul right now. I pray for the one that's just caught up in religion, caught up in to-do lists, and caught up in performance. May they just get off that treadmill, and that you are the Lord of the Sabbath. Offer this rest for their soul, that they can just go back to that relationship with you. Lord, I pray for those that because of their sin, and they recognize their sin, that they're outside of your will. They've never had a relationship with you. And you invite them into a relationship because of what you've already established and what you did on the cross for them and for us. That burden of sin, that slavery of sin that they can give and put upon you, that you've taken it and died for them and forgave them through your blood to cleanse them, Lord. And Lord, as we enter this time of communion, may we hold in our hands what's so valuable. You, the Lord of Sabbath, the Lord of rest, provided everything that we need. When we eat of your body, recognizing you're broken and put to death for us, that we can experience life. Then we hold and we drink of the cup of your blood that was spilled, the sacrifice for our sins. Bringing those together is this beautiful life of rest that we can have. And Lord, I pray that not only that we live in this day of rest and these moments of Sabbath through our week and this rhythm of life that we do, but Lord, we would live a life of rest and delight in Sabbath with you each and every day that we get, being the Lord of the Sabbath, the Lord of rest, for the rest for our souls, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.